Welcome to Seek Reality with Roberta Grimes. Joyous conversations about what the afterlife evidence and modern science combine to tell us is true about our one reality. You have nothing to fear. You are eternal and you are perfectly loved. Knowing the truth changes everything. Now, here's Roberta.
Welcome to Seek Reality. I'm Roberta Grimes and I'm delighted you're with us today. My dear friends, some of our guests here at Seek Reality have been so transformational for me that they have actually reinvented my view of something really major in the field of some area where I have felt like an expert. The afterlife, the greater reality, my relationship with spirit, big things. And that's been the case with our guest today. He has caused me, believe it or not, to take another look at the whole Catholic Church. Our guest this week is here for the 9th time. He's the wonderful, sweet, delightful, beautiful Father Nathan Castle, who is a humble leader in the field of doing afterlife rescue work. We have known Father Nathan here for something like 5 years, I think, maybe a little more, ever since his first book came out. And I flat could not believe that this spirit rescue work was something that the Catholic Church would even allow. But they do allow it, and right then and there I had a whole different view of the Catholic Church. Father Nathan is a Dominican priest who lives and works in a community of Dominican men and women serving the University of Arizona in Tucson. He's a gentle and a very spiritual man, and about 25 years, maybe closer to 30 years ago now, he was recruited by elevated beings not in bodies to do spirit rescue work with them. As I have only very lately come to accept, to my horror, and I think to yours too, almost 25% of people go off track for a time when they die, and they generally do that by their own choice. We'll talk more about this perhaps today, and our wonderful friend, Father Nathan, is one of those who is trusted to help to rescue some of these people when they feel ready to be rescued. Mm-hmm. Before I first met Father Nathan, I already knew quite a lot about more traditional spirit rescue work, and I even had experimented with learning how to do it myself with the late, great expert Bruce Moen. But I never would have dreamed that the Catholic Church would sanction something like spirit rescue work. Then in 2019, I read Father Nathan's terrific first book, which is called Afterlife Interrupted, Helping Stuck Souls Cross Over. And everything in it was completely consistent with what I had learned during all my decades of doing afterlife research. And that book was then followed by books 2 and 3 with similar titles. Father Nathan's books are, I have to say, they're terrific. They're absolutely terrific, and you're going to love this interview. Father Nathan, welcome. I'm thrilled to have you here. Great to have you back.
Thank you so much.
I love talking with you. I love the revelations you've given us about what really goes on. And the Catholic Church tries very hard to be very spiritual, and this is all very spiritual stuff.
Well, it means universal, and it's trying to embrace the universe. And, we do that in a kind of hit and miss way, don't we? We'd all like to be universally loving and kind and compassionate and fair and so on. And we do that well sometimes and not as well other times. So
I think it's more open-minded than the Protestant churches are. I don't think they would sanction this, really.
Well, I guess it would depend on which one you're talking about, but you mentioned rescue work. I was thinking, I saw something recently of one of those guys that's like dangling from a helicopter, picking somebody off a cliff or off a burning ship or something like that. It's not nearly as dramatic as that. The work that my partners and I do is more where we're with an afterlife team and with a spirit team in the Catholic Church of Saints and Angels, the language that we use. And we are members of a team, but I don't believe that we are at all the headliners. I think we just have a modest place. I think of us as near the door on the way out of a healthcare system. We're like the discharge staff, that the work that has happened since the people that I and my partners deal with almost all died violently and suddenly.
Yes.
Or they had some tragedy that happened during their life that sort of killed their spirit, and they never really got over it and kind of trudged to the grave, and then brought with them into the next phase unresolved grief of some kind. And the hard work has been done, and we are at the tail end of it, and we help them out the door. So we're the discharge staff. And that involves helping them gather themselves, collect their imagination, imagine something new that they're going to, and then they'll need a companion and some sort of transportation. We help with that.
That's right. Yes, that I would think that's very well put. We who know the process, have studied the process, know that we do life planning before we're born, and part of that is exit points. And the people that you help generally died not at their exit point. They sort of exited in a peculiar way, usually, and therefore they're kind of cast out of their bodies. And that's when they die violently, when they die in a surprising way, they often need to be rescued anyway, and they just chose not to be rescued right away. Some of them were embarrassed about how they died. Some of them, or they felt shame, and they kind of traveled in the wilds for a while.
Yeah.
And they were rescued. Their spirit guide is with them. Maybe they have angels with them. They're being helped to feel whole again. They're being helped to feel spiritually well again. And now they're ready to go home, kind of, and you're helping them to do that.
The idea of being saved and rescued, those are pretty close,
Mm-hmm.
But what does it really mean? If, is it some metaphysical being saved from a fallen state that's metaphysical or whatever? It's for people that went through a very violent event that caused their death of this body, the idea of being saved, it takes on a new resonance. They really do need something from outside of themselves or others from outside of themselves to help them navigate all of this sudden, very abrupt, a broad change. So that idea of us saving one another, of Jesus saving or Christ saving us, to me, that's embodied in the community. And I've been a pastor much of my life and on university campuses, trying to create communities that can catch each other and be there at critical moments for each other. So it's not just something that happens in your private prayer life or some other way that we make tangible. The idea that I've got your back, that's part of saving somebody, is being there to catch them when they fall. And so this work somehow falls into that in a mysterious way.
Right. And I know that saints, angels, spirits at a very elevated level often are part of this rescue work.
Yes. Especially our own guardians. That's the language that I use as a Catholic, that I was taught as a baby. As a child, I had a picture of the guardian angel over my bed, and I was a little tiny kid, and I was praying to my guardian early on. I had a lapse of some time, after in my teens and later, where I didn't do that, but later returned to it. And the guardians are real. They're sometimes there other languages might be used, spirit guides, or I don't know what else you might have heard, but guardian angel, exalted spirit, you used some energy beings, whatever. Your guardian is just a pivotal person, and they are persons. They're not human persons, nor are they divine persons or angelic persons, but they share with us personality, and they are all over helping the one. They might not have been able to help you, not die in the car crash. You might want to say, well, what kind of guardian were you? You let me die in a car crash. Well, I did the best I could. I got you out of it before you flew through the windshield.
That's right. That's right. You were out of the body before the crash.
Over and over again. I see that the worst, when we lose someone we love or hear about people in the news that went through something just horrific, what I've seen in many of these stories is, yes, of course it was, except not as bad as you might imagine, because I was pulled out of it before my body burned.
Yes.
whatever.
Before, yeah, exactly. That's what we see too from the area where we working with these horrible events. They were out of the body before the body burned or before the body went through that horrible
Right.
Event.
There's a story in the newest book of a young man that was in a work van, one of those 15 passenger ones with
Yes.
several rows of seats, and he was located all the way in the back in the middle, so nowhere near a door or a window. When he was on a work crew involving petrochemical work, oil field work, and refineries, which I grew up in Port Arthur, Texas, which is just one great big refinery. So, and that's my dad took ships in and out of the refineries. So I was very familiar with the landscape he was describing. But there was an explosion in this refinery that didn't affect them directly, but they figured it's probably changed our day. You know, our work, the work we're on our way to is probably different. We need to get on the radio and find out. Well, the guy that was driving had to turn them around. He had to turn around this 15 passenger van and had never driven one before. And he chose a space that was not sufficiently wide for the turning radius of it. And they were teetering on a bluff above a nasty body of water with, inside an oil refinery. You probably don't want to go swimming there.
No.
He had, for a moment, he was only 23, but he's funny. And he thought of a Far Side cartoon. Do you remember the Far Side?
Yes.
They're one panel, ridiculous cartoons that were popular for about 15 years. There was one that was called the Crisis Center. Do you happen to remember it, Roberta?
No. I can imagine.
It didn't even need a caption. It was just a picture, a pen and ink drawing of a 3-story brick building that must have been swept away in a flood because it's in a river. It's floating down a river, and it's on fire, and it's about to go over a waterfall. On the outside of it, the sign just says Crisis Center.
Oh, yes. Okay, I get it.
It's one of his most famous ones, Every conceivable crisis is going on this minute at the Crisis Center, right?
Right.
He said, I thought there was a chance. He thought of those movies where there's a spinning tire because the vehicle is just perched on a cliff and maybe it's going to get traction and maybe it isn't. And he said, I knew we were in one of those, except it wasn't a movie. And he said, if we fell, we would he said, I wasn't wearing a seatbelt because nobody in a van wears a seatbelt. And he referenced like the ones that take you from the parking lot into the airport. He says, who bothers with a seatbelt in one of those? It was like that. I wasn't wearing a seatbelt. I knew that if we rolled, I would be a rag doll inside this thing, and I could die of blunt force trauma, or it could explode into fire and I could burn to death, or it could go all the way to the bottom and I would drown in nasty water inside an oil refinery.
Oh, geez.
He only had a moment to think about this, but that's what he was thinking about as the thing did topple, and his guardian yanked him out of it. And he called his guardian Tinkerbell from Peter Pan.
Oh my!
She slid around, and he said Tinkerbell pulled me out, sat me next to the road, and said, "Do you understand that you are safe and that you are here with me?" Yes. Your body is over there, but you're over here. Do you understand? Yes. He said, your body carried you through many things, but it couldn't carry you through that.
No.
You can look at it if you want to or not. And then they're without gender, but they kind of present as more masculine or feminine, and they go with that.
One or the other, right.
And Tinkerbell said, we're going to stay right here until you say the word. When you say the word, I'll take you to somewhere better. And he thought, I could stay on the side of a road where I just died or somewhere better. How many worse places are there than where he was? So he said, I think I'd like somewhere better.
Yes. That is exactly the conversation they over and over again say they had right after their death in a car.
If they're alert, sometimes they're unconscious because they're not all, at least the ones I deal with, sometimes they wake up somewhere that they've been brought. Very much the way if you or I were in a medical emergency and we were unconscious, the paramedics take us to the most appropriate place.
Right,
and then
right. But so often that is just the kind of conversation they have. They get to see what happened, and then they get to go someplace.
Well, he was so good at describing it. And then he was a Catholic guy. He was a young Italian, and he was like 23. And he explained that everybody in his family was named Anthony. He said we couldn't name anybody that didn't have some version. We tortured the name Anthony. Everybody was Antoinette or Tonette or Tony. And he said that his Italian family was the kind of love-hate thing, that they were large and boisterous and they had lots of small businesses. And it was late. He said, I started working for family businesses when I was about 10.
Oh, wow.
In the stockroom or sweeping or doing something. And he said as he got a little older in his teens, different aunts and uncles tried to recruit him into their work. But he said they couldn't leave each other alone. They were always whining and complaining about their siblings. Somebody skipped out on Nana's 90th birthday and there was hell to pay, or somebody said something at Thanksgiving, or somebody did something.
Yeah, close family.
And he just said, I knew if I worked for any of them, they'd just draw me into their drama and I'd have a lifetime of it. And he said, I knew I didn't want to work for any of them. So he got this oil field job. And he said, it wasn't my future, but it was my right now. Right. So he was this kind of part-time job that he was kind of enjoying. And then this happened. And when it came time for him to leave, he didn't need very much afterlife care because he was just so good at being in the moment.
Yeah.
But he said when it came time for him to pass, his family came for him in a group. He said one of the elders visited me and said, Tony, what the hell are you doing here? You're too young to be here. But so different relatives came and visited him and kind of coaxed him out of something like a nursing home room or something. He had needed a little bit of something like medical care. And then by the end of it, he explained that his family came for him, and he said, do you remember the flying Wallendas?
Yeah.
Do you remember the flying Wallendas? I don't know if I saw them there was television shows in the 60s when I was growing up that would have had these acts, and they were acrobats. There were a whole family of generations of acrobats. And he said, well, it's my family, and they all look like they're floating, and they're all named Anthony. So he said he called them the floating Anthonys.
Yeah, so floating.
So here came the floating Anthonys, and they came for him, and they said, you belong with us. It's all good. And then, we never use any of these stories in public unless we go back at least one more time to ask their permission to tell the stories, make them public. And so that when we went back, sometime later, more than a year, I think, he said, I got to meet the real dude.
The real dude?
The real dude, Saint Anthony of Padua.
Oh, that's the real dude,
Saint Catholic Saint Anthony of Padua. He's, my grandmother had a devotion to Saint Anthony of Padua, and got to meet the real dude. And he said he's really kind of a cool guy. It's not that he has some like secret dark side, or but there's other parts of him that are not just like plaster saint stuff. And so
we all have that side too. He had a playful side as well.
He did, and he manifested it to Anthony. And then as it went on, he explained that his when he got with his family, they said to him, relax. We've all been told we're not allowed to torture each other for all eternity. We can't continue with this pettiness that we used to do that made you want to not be working with us.
Oh, that's nice.
I think it's really encouraging for any of us who can only take family in small doses or whatever that you can wait in joyful hope for the day when we get past whatever it is that makes us so weird and annoying and whatnot. There's a version of
family in the afterlife is just fun. That's nice to look forward to.
Yeah, I mean, it's not automatic because people have to change behavior, and that means choosing to change behavior.
Yes,
but that kind of progress only happens when you stop behaving like an idiot, and that's what he was saying. That So he's just delightful. He's in the new book
That's wonderful. The new book just came out this year, everyone.
in mid-December. Yeah.
Yes, so let's look forward to reading that. But all of these books are so enjoyable. They're like candy. They read so happily and so comfortably. And some of the stories are wonderful, and some of them have Jesus in them. A lot of the people who enjoy my podcasts also really enjoy stories about Jesus. So you've got some of those in there too.
I do. Although they're more about what I would say is the Holy Spirit. Well, we're recording this in April, and Easter was 3 weeks ago. And in the churches that follow a common lectionary, like the Catholic Church, the Episcopal, the Methodist, the Lutheran, Presbyterian, we would all be in this time of the year focusing on those stories of Jesus after the crucifixion, apparition stories. And in those, a lot of them, even though people have known him for several years by now, they don't recognize him at first. He doesn't look exactly the way he did before. And Mary Magdalene recognizes him in John's Gospel when she calls her name, Mary. It was the sound of his voice that did the trick. And then other times he looks like some guy walking down a road. And so there's a way in which he gets us used to not just seeing him in that headshot photo with the beard and the toga, the sandals, whatever. He gets people, they need to get used to seeing him inside each other, because spirit means breath, and he can be breathed in this new form after the death on the cross. And they have to get used to him being embedded inside them. So you still look like Roberta, but Roberta to the gazillionth power, because Jesus, the Christ, is living inside you, coming out through your smile and out through your eyes, out your compassion and all that. So many of the stories have that component to it, where there was one in the second book, there was a guy that we call John the Baptist, because he was a preacher in a small rural church that had Baptist in the name of it, but was an independent church. It wasn't affiliated with a denominational organization. But it had Baptist in its name. And he was asked by a man who came to church alone, a divorced man, if he would meet him to talk. And they only had a baptism once in a while because they were a small church. But when they did adult baptism, it was in the river. And so they would announce at the service, next week, don't come here to the church. We're going to meet at the river. And so there was this clearing where there was a nice space for the water wasn't too swift or deep, and perfect for baptizing. And there was enough space to park. So this guy really loved this. That was his highlight of his life, was baptizing. And this man said, could we meet down by the river? And they met down by the river, and they both drove a truck. And he said, I have something in my truck I want to show you. Would you come over here? And when the pastor did that, the guy conked him over the head, knocked him out, tied him up, and threw him in the river and drowned him.
My goodness.
He had no idea why this was happening. He barely knew the guy. Well, the way the story unfolded, it turned out that this man who killed him was having an affair with the pastor's wife. Yeah. And he said, I had no idea that my wife would ever do such a thing. He said, we married young and we learned about sex with each other. And I never thought of her as someone who another man would look at and lust for, but that's what happened. And he said, I didn't know until afterwards that was the backstory of all this. But he landed in something like an afterlife spa care center because he needed caring. He had been beaten up and brutalized. He needed loving care. And he said, I got it. Everybody that cared for me was real sweet. And they moved me through a process bit by bit by bit to understand what had happened, what might be next. And he said, but there were lots of them, the way that when you're in a hospital, you usually have any number of shifts of different people coming and going, and different ones that are a respiratory one, or somebody's doing your blood, or somebody's just bringing in a tray of food. He said there was this one fellow that kept visiting, and he was always so nice. He was like a chaplain, and he would not stay too long, because you shouldn't when people are so ill. But he stayed longer and said he'd come back, and eventually he asked, "When am I going to see Jesus?" And the people told him, "Well, you know what? He's in all of us, and you've been seeing him all along." He said they had to take me back to Christian preschool and remind me about the Holy Spirit, that the Holy Spirit is Jesus, that there's only one God, and God is one but has many different ways of manifesting. He said he's in all of us, but if you want to see that version of him with the toga and the sandals, we'll get you ready for that. So that happened on his own time. Well, I didn't get to be a party to that, but he explained that he was going to get to see the Jesus that he thought, the everlasting arms. It was one of his favorite hymns, that he would be swooped up into the everlasting arms, and he was still awaiting that. But he had to be told, Jesus has been with you all along. He just looks different.
Yeah, how fascinating.
Yeah.
You must love doing what you do.
I do. There's such variety in it. And I meet the nicest people. Many of them are people that you've not heard of. Others are people that are famous, and they're quick to say, everybody here is well thought of. People aren't, in awe or gawking at us just because we used to sing or dance or do something that made us very well known, because everyone here is well known. And
yes.
So you see that, but sometimes there's a bit of a boost that people get when they're still in this transitional thing that we do, where it's a boost to your spirit to know that somebody famous showed up for you. Wow, well, I would have never thought I would be meeting you. Thank you for being here. So that can be fun. And then just all of it, they all die so horribly, and it kind of doesn't matter after a while.
No.
After everybody heals, if they participate with what's offered, and it's never forced. And some go very slowly, others go rapidly. In fact, we give them a chance when we go back and ask for their permission to use their story. And we said, "Tony, what would you like to say to the world?" and he said, "Get on with it. Hurry up." He said, "You can do the slow and steady thing if you want to, but why would you do that? Just grab it." And he said, "You don't need to think that the road ahead is too difficult. You won't have what you need. If you strive and push and make yourself go hard and fast, resources you didn't know existed will show up to help you." So he said, "It's none of my business how other people live their life, but you're giving me a chance to give a piece of advice, and that's it. I would say, go fast."
Yeah, embrace it and don't take it so seriously. So many people just plod and don't, they wallow in it, and they wallow in it so negatively.
Yeah. And they're respected, at least that's what I've seen, but they're called out on falsehood. Truth is hugely important to the whole thing. And as a believer in Jesus, that's one of the things he calls himself in John's gospel. "I am the way, the truth, and the life."
And the truth. Right.
And even if people don't use theological categories or even spiritual ones, because not everybody does, if they will move toward the truth of who they are, they're moving toward the light, and they're moving to the one that I know is Jesus.
Yes.
Whether they conceive of their movement that way or not.
Right.
You and anyone who's watching or listening to this has probably had a time in your life where you told yourself a story that was not the whole truth. Something about yourself or your career or your family or whatever, you kind of create a narrative and say, essentially, that's my story and I'm sticking to it. And then the guardians are real good in the afterlife about saying, "Yeah, Roberta, that's true to a point, but did you remember this other thing? You're leaving this part out." And people will go, "Oh my God, it's true. It's true. I'm exaggerating because I want my story to be this, but in fact, it also includes that."
I don't think I've done that. I think the truth is so exciting, even though it may not be beautiful. It's still exciting because it's real.
Yeah.
What's
Well,
real?
you're also a lawyer, aren't you?
Yes. But I've never been a courtroom lawyer.
Well, I didn't think you were, but you know, in courtroom law, at least on television, you have to swear that you will tell the truth,
Yes.
whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Well, but I've never known a courtroom lawyer who would tell the truth. That's the problem. They don't tell the truth. They don't.
Well, I'm glad I didn't do that for a living. I don't think I'd be any good at that.
Because you have to tell your client's version of the truth, which is over here somewhere, not that truth, which is the real truth.
All of the energy that goes into that kind of falseness, people can bring it with them. But, you know, growing up as a Catholic, there might be Catholics in your audience that learned about purgatory as some sort of a penal colony or jail cell, and that Jesus Christ, God, somebody was the judge, and they were going to oversee the fact that you didn't advance until you had served the full sentence. That's not what I observe. I think the part where Jesus is judge is not the sentencing phase, it's the discovery phase.
Yes. No. In fact, the whole process of we really judge ourselves after death, and we are the hardest judge there is, because you can't hide after death. You cannot hide from yourself. We look harshly at yourself.
I've seen that.
Jesus is a much, much more merciful judge. Jesus loves us.
Have you ever been critical of anybody else when you're in his presence, when you're having some dialogic experience of him, person to person? Have you ever been critical of somebody else in front of him?
No, I could never be critical of other people. I love them too much.
Well, that's because you're advanced. But lots of us want to go low on somebody. And when we think that we're in safe company and there's a third party that we have some beef with, we can say, oh, Roberta, you know, he did it again. And then we're off to the races telling some story because we think that you're kind of going to be our co-conspirator. And then you might come out with, oh, but you don't know her quite the way I do. She's really delightful when you get to know her better. That's the way Jesus does. He'll because he loves everybody, and he knows
Jesus is so fully, perfectly loving. There is no possible way you can make Jesus be less than perfectly loving. That's been my experience of Jesus.
And perfectly knowing and wise. So we only see the tip of the iceberg of other people. We see what they allow us to see. And some of that's appropriate because you don't need know the whole story of the cashier at the store, you know, somebody in the drive-through, or somebody in the extended family that's kind of an outer circle part of your life. You don't need to know everything, but sometimes we jump to conclusions about other people based on next to nothing, on faulty information. And he always knows the truth. And even if you do behave badly, he knows why you're doing it.
Yeah, that's the thing with Jesus. Jesus knows our innermost soul.
Yeah.
And that's been my experience. I mean, you may know better than I, but Jesus seems only to know us at our perfect heart.
Well, and people might think of him as the son of the carpenter, but the work that we see him do in the Gospels is that of a teacher. He's a rabbi.
Yes, totally.
I've been in academic ministry my whole life. I went off to kindergarten at 5, and I haven't left the educational field since then at 68. So I've been around lots of teachers, and I teach. But the best teachers I've ever had saw potential in me before I did. And they drew it out of me.
Yes.
They can see a future version of this kid, of this student, and they can somehow steer you into the direction of your higher, better self.
I'm sure you're a wonderful teacher.
Yeah.
Because you write that way. That's how you write.
I love to teach, and I love words. And originally I was an art student, and when I shifted from tactile arts, from oils and all those things, um, and became a preacher, I had to adapt to words being my media, my artistic media. And so I pay a lot of attention to what they mean and etymologies, how the words we use came to be, kind of the history of a word and other words it's related to. Most abstract words have some concrete application. I'm just thinking of one. Talk a little bit while I collect my thoughts. I'm trying to.
You know what it is about Jesus?
Summit. You know what I want to tell you this while I talk, but before I forget it. Summit. I was thinking about the word sum the other day. SUM.
Yes.
And it often means to conclude, to sum up. But it also is the root of the word summit.
Yes.
The peak of a high mountain. That's because the Romans, when they added from the bottom up, and the sum was at the top of the column and not at the bottom.
Oh, yes.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, fascinating.
Not as fascinating as Jesus. You were about to say something about Jesus, I
The
think.
thing about Jesus is that he sees you at your highest, and he makes you live to your highest.
Yes.
That's the thing about Jesus. He sees you as your highest self. So it isn't so much that you already are that, but he sees you as that, and so you live to that.
Yes.
And you stop being less than that.
Right.
Have you when you do a lot of communing with Jesus, you just stop being anything less than what he sees?
Yes.
Notice that?
Are you familiar with the word theosis?
I've heard it, but I don't really know what it means.
It has to do with being divinized. I never say of myself, I'm only human. Now, it's true that I am human, but I also have the divine spark in me, and I'm being transformed from version to version to version of who I can be, because that's what love does.
But the love of Jesus makes you live to his standard.
Yes.
And when you live to his standard, there's nothing less than him in you anymore.
That's what I mean. That's essentially what theosis is. It's where St. Paul can say, I'm no longer me, but I've died, and I'm no longer me. I'm the Christ who lives in me.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly it. Exactly it. You stop being anything less than Jesus, because there's nothing less than Jesus left in you.
And in Paul's case, he didn't only die a martyr's death, but he was threatened with it over and over again, stoned and beaten, and could have died any number of times before.
It doesn't even matter anymore. You don't even care about that.
He really didn't. He just said, count it as a joy.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really true.
Yeah.
But I was trying to explain to you what it feels like.
Yeah.
And I try to teach that. If you spend enough time with Jesus, it stops even mattering to you. Nothing else even matters.
Mm-hmm. Well, I live that way a lot of the time, not all the time. But
I'm trying to teach this. I'm teaching a course in living this way.
yes.
And as people start to get it, watching them develop the joy of it is quite wonderful, actually.
Yes. Well, from my Catholic training, I was taught about, I had the picture of the guardian angel over my bed, but I had the statue of Mary on the nightstand. And I was told that I had family on earth and a family in heaven. And this is my other mother. My mom was teaching me about my other mother, and, our church was named for her and so on. So, not every Christian, has that, as part of their religious imagination, but as a Catholic, I did from tiny. And she shows up a fair amount. There's 3 stories in the new book where she has a prominent role, and she's full of the spirit of her son. she bore him in her own body. And she shows up, and it's just the sweetest thing. Just, she says, I'm often depicted with these crowns and gowns, but I was a poor woman who had dirt beneath my nails more often than not. I can't think of a day when I didn't sweep the floor. She's completely down to earth and very eager to help folk for whom she's kind of a good fit. So there's several stories where she has a prominent role.
That must be just lovely. Beautiful.
She's delightful. So there's one rather long story. Do you remember the Rwandan genocide in 1994?
Oh my, yes.
Where people who had been from competing tribes had lived in peace for a time. And then there began to be, those lines that define the nation states in Africa were drawn mostly by European colonizers. And they didn't really pay very much attention to indigenous groupings of people. And that genocide happened, and suddenly people who'd lived in peace saw each other tribally, and one started killing the other. There was this one family, instead of giving me a little narrative of a dream, they just showed me a snapshot that looked like a posed family photo, except they smiled and waved. That's all it was. And I woke up going, I think that was contact. I think somebody wanted me to notice them. So I wrote it down, and we went into prayer. And it turned out the man said, yes, I just didn't want to show you what happened to us because we were in the Rwandan genocide. He said, I was a Catholic catechist. I was a leader in my local church, and my wife and my daughter were as well. So when the danger happened, we ran to our church hoping to be safe there, and we hid. And he said, but when the closet we were in, when the door opened, instead of seeing someone who was going to save us, we saw people who murdered us with machetes. And he said, I just couldn't bring myself to come into a priest's sleeping imagination and show him that. So I hope that we could just wave at you and get your attention. And it worked. So,
Oh, dear. Oh.
But Mary showed up in that one, and so did a saint that many would not have known of, called St. Charles Lwanga. He died in Uganda in 1885 as a martyr, and then became canonized and part of the Catholic Church somewhere in the 20th century. And he showed up to say hello and said he would be on the team. And then the fellow described, as he showed me a scene, he said, we were people who never threw anything away. We lived pretty simply, and we never threw anything away. We found another use for it. And he said there were these large sacks that grain and different things arrived in, like burlap sacks that you might have been in a sack race.
Yes.
We saved those. And he said, and then he said, we saved fabric. When some article of clothing was too raggedy, we saved the fabric for some other use, at least dust cloths or something. But he said we were, one of the things we were doing is that we were trying to teach the children that Jesus and Mary and the Holy Family were not just Belgian. He said that it was the Belgians who brought the faith here, and the Germans. And he said, so all the holy pictures they had looked like Jesus was a Belgian or a German. And he said, mine is the third generation of the faith in this region. And he said some of the missionaries taught us that eventually our own artists would have to catch up and make new artwork that would make Jesus look a little bit more Palestinian than Belgian. And he said, so what we did was we took the cloth and made a dye bath. And then he said, we took corn shucks because corn grew, the Europeans brought it, but it grew very, very well here. There was always an abundance of corn. And he said, but rather than throw away the shucks, we put them in the sun and dried them and put them under rocks to make it flat. And then it became something like construction paper. And the children could use scissors and paste and make dolls and things from the corn husks.
That's lovely. Oh,
and
dear.
he saved they put the fabric in a black dye bath to make it look like African skin. And then they would make Madonna and Child little dolls.
Oh, lovely.
And he showed me a scene of him supervising that as a catechist. little children making their Madonna and child dolls. And then he said, one of the other things we did was we took those big sacks and we poked a couple of holes in one end of it and ran a cord through it, and we turned it into a sled. You could drag it along the ground, and the older children could drag the younger children, or the adults could drag the children, and it became a toy. So when it was time for them to cross, he said, I'm grateful that I can be the spokesperson. He said, I was a chieftain in a house of 3 chieftains. My wife and my daughter were very strong-willed women, and they proved how strong they were in the ordeal of our deaths. He said, we were a household of chieftains. And he said, when it came time he said, I'm grateful that my wife and my daughter don't have to talk in this process, that I can do the talking. And then when it came time for them to cross, here came Mary as Our Lady of Rwanda. And she came on the line and she said, these people are very sweet and they live a life very much like I did. I never threw anything away. We always turned something into another use. And when it came time for them to cross, Abraham was the father's name. He came on the line and said, she must be very strong because she wants us all 3 of us to sit down on a sack, and she's going to pull us to the next dimension.
I wish we could talk all day. We have totally run out of time.
Oh, well.
This always happens. Oh, my dear friend. I'm so, so glad that we were able to do this again. And we will do it again very soon. But you're doing such a wonderful job. You're such a wonderful ambassador for your gift. And,
well, I'm enjoying it. Thank you.
What do you want people to take away from what we've been talking about today?
One of the people in the new book said, she died, her husband and only child, a 2-year-old, died in a car crash. And she grieved and grieved until she died. But then she said, don't let the worst thing define you.
Beautifully said.
Don't let the worst thing define you, because it's going to turn. The darkness precedes the dawn. Good Friday comes.
Absolutely right.
It will get better. It really will.
Well, thank you so much, my dear friend. I'll see you very, very soon, and I hope you have a terrific summer.
All right. Thanks. Let's do it.
And everyone, next week, I can't talk about any of this, just quickly. Next week, our great friend, Dr. R. Craig Hogan, will be with us for the 45th time in almost 11 years. And we're going to be talking about something wonderful with Craig. You'll see, but this has been terrific. This week, we've been talking with Father Nathan Castle. He's been here for the 9th time. And what Father Nathan does truly is the Lord's work. Afterlife Interrupted, Helping Stuck Souls Cross Over are his books. There are 3 of them. I recommend them all. And there's no time to talk about anything else because I just get mesmerized whenever I talk with Father Nathan. And there's no time to talk about anything else. I have some books, you know what they are, and you can get there are more than 500 past episodes. You can get them wherever podcasts are available. You can get a free app wherever apps are available to get the new Seek Reality apps. You can get the videos wherever videos are available. And meanwhile, this has been Seek Reality with Roberta Grimes. Please enjoy and please make the most of this coming week in our one reality, always knowing that you are a powerful, eternal being. You never began, you never will end. And the most important thing I want you to know is you, most of all in this entire universe, you are infinitely, powerfully, and eternally loved.
You've been listening to Seek Reality with Roberta Grimes. Roberta blogs and answers questions at robertagrimes.com. Join us every week as we explore what the afterlife evidence and modern science combine to tell us is true about the one reality we all share. Knowing the truth changes everything.